What's going on, geeks and geekettes? You've arrived at your destination, Geek Boulevard. Your host, Steve, here. Another summer blockbuster film and another film review. That's right, I have seen The Flash, and I'm going to go over some of the positives, the negatives, and give my overall score of the film. I've included timestamps in the description below for you to skip to a certain section if you'd like. There will be a spoiler section later in this video, so feel free to skip that part if you want to go into the film as blindly as possible. Otherwise, thanks for joining me. The Flash is directed by Andy Muschietti. It is rated PG-13 with a runtime of 2 hours and 24 minutes. Now, what is The Flash actually about? Well, it goes something like this. Worlds collide when the Flash uses his superpowers to travel back in time to change the events of the past. However, when his attempt to save his family inadvertently alters the future, he becomes trapped in a reality in which General Zod has returned, threatening annihilation. With no other superheroes to turn to, the Flash looks to coax a very different Batman out of retirement and rescue an imprisoned Kryptonian, albeit not the one he's looking for. This movie finally releasing into theaters is an achievement unto itself. Announced back in 2015, I believe, the project has gone through so many changes, multiple directors and writers, and there's also the elephant in the room, the legal issues surrounding Ezra Miller, but we won't touch on that here. Now that it's finally out, has The Flash closed out the DCEU with a bang and delivered on the hype that was promised? Or does the DCEU end on more of a whimper? Let's dive in and find out. Let's start with our main cast. The star of the film, Ezra Miller, continues the journey of Barry Allen, and despite some groups thinking he was the worst part of Justice League, I disagree. I thought Ezra as Barry Allen was a pretty good casting choice. They played Barry as this awkward, intelligent, but also pretty naive superhero trying to make an impact in a world filled with metahumans. Now that Flash has his own solo film, I can honestly say that Ezra Miller has dialed that up to 11. And I, for one, thoroughly enjoyed it. But it goes deeper than that. The film deals heavily in the thought of second chances. If we could go back, what would we change? Who can we save? In this case, it's his mother who was killed when he was a child. Barry relives that moment over and over, wishing he could have saved her. Ezra portrays that pretty well here. We have two versions of Barry in this film, present-day Barry and past Barry. Both versions are played just differently enough by Miller that we get a nice dynamic between the two on screen, and is also the groundwork for many jokes in the film. Ben Affleck makes his return as Batman in the opening moments of the film, and it really made me miss him that much more as the character. I'm sorry to see him go. I loved him in BVS. I mean, that warehouse scene. Mwah, chef's kiss, man. A solid performance from a solid actor. I just wish we would have seen more of him. Michael Keaton also returns as Batman and steals literally every scene that he's in. It was so great to see him don the suit again after so long. His action scenes were just great. My only gripe was how he was handled in the climax, and I'll explain why when I get into the spoiler section of my review. Sasha Calle makes her debut as Kara Zor-El, Supergirl, and I'll admit, like most, I was skeptical also of her role in the film before going in, but I can confidently say that Sasha nailed this role to perfection. From her dialogue to her action-heavy moments, I was pleasantly surprised how much I wanted to see more of her on screen. When the Supergirl movie eventually gets made under the leadership of James Gunn, please do not recast. Sasha deserves her own solo outing here, as I wanted more of her story told. Michael Shannon returns as a very much alive General Zod. Now, Michael Shannon is a phenomenal actor. His portrayal as the character in Man of Steel was presented with such dedication that you felt it on screen. There was a lot of behind-the-scenes video of him just prepping for this role, working out, doing all these scenes with Henry before actually shooting. He cared about it that much. Here, it just did not sit well with me. I personally felt as if Shannon was being told where to look and where to attack for most of his scenes, and it just felt very phoned in, and his role did not feel as important. It just seemed like he was there for a paycheck. Now let's dive deep on the CGI in this film. Plain and simple, it's not great at all. There was an interview that Andy Muschietti did that stated that the CGI is a little weird in spots on purpose because Barry is in the Speed Force, so things are moving at a much faster pace or a much slower pace. Things are a little distorted, which to me just seems like a very piss-poor excuse. There were many moments where I was taken out of the experience because it was so obvious that what I was seeing was clearly CGI. The point of CGI in a film is for it to be good enough to where you don't even notice it. And here I noticed it a lot. especially in scenes where a past Barry and present Barry are in the same shot. I can see that one of them is actually an acting double with Ezra's face plastered onto theirs. I don't personally understand why those scenes were not shot with Ezra just doing those scenes as both characters with a split screen method maybe, or perhaps just have cuts when they're talking. I'm sure there were ways that they could have gotten around that. And yeah, it might make it less convincing, but it gave that sort of uncanny valley type of vibe as the facial CGI just looked incredibly unnatural. The opening action scene, which involves a hospital and some babies, was just really goofy when it came to the special effects. I was literally sitting there dumbfounded by how ridiculous it actually was. And this is clearly a sign that VFX workers were overworked and underpaid, which just upsets me to no end. On to our next section, which is the writing. The screenplay for this film was written by Christina Hodson, whose past credits include Bumblebee, which was great, and Birds of Prey, which was not so great. But I would say her writing for The Flash hits more than it misses. Now, even though this is a Flash movie, I feel Christina wrote this film as a love letter to all of DC instead, which I was a little disappointed by, but I'll explain in the spoiler section. However, each main character, no matter how big or small the role was, had their time to shine. Even General Zod did. What I really loved in the writing was the connection Barry had with his mother Nora, played beautifully by Maribel Verdú. The chemistry these two had really shown through on screen, so I was happy to see that. Now, when it comes to the villains that were written for the film, I was let down. I said villains as there is another villain in The Flash, and they were just as disappointing as Zod. I'd almost forgotten that this character was in the movie, as they were almost non-existent until the final act. And with all that down, it's time to get into our spoilers section of my review. So this is your final warning. If you have not seen The Flash and want to avoid spoilers, skip ahead to get my overall thoughts. Continuing on from my point earlier about Michael Keaton's role in the film, I was a little let down that he reached his demise in a pretty cheap way. In the final act, Barry 1 and 2, Supergirl, and Batman are fighting Zod's forces. Things start to look pretty grim for the group as Supergirl meets her demise and Batman sacrifices himself. Expectedly so. But my issue with that is that it felt very cheap and didn't feel like the proper send-off for the character that I was hoping for. Now, there is more than one villain here outside of General Zod. In certain moments throughout the film, Barry goes into the Speed Force to turn back time to try to save his mother from being killed, which leads to the events that unfold as you watch. However, there's another person in the Speed Force that has been watching him. It is revealed later on that this person is actually Barry Allen himself. The past version of Barry that the present day one interacts with cannot come to grips with the fact that both Batman and Supergirl both perish in this fight against Zod, so he repeatedly goes back in time to change the outcome, with present day Barry warning him of the consequences. He eventually travels back so many times that he becomes a dark and twisted version of himself. And I would forgive this part of the film if the Dark Flash that becomes the villain for the remainder would have had more screen time and motivations made more clear early on. They just show up, have a little fight, and then they're gone. Earlier, I stated that this film is more of a love letter to DC than a Flash film, and that is shown through the cameos. A lot of cameos. We see multiple universes here. George Reeves from the Adventures of Superman TV series, the late Christopher Reeve, and Helen Slater as Superman and Supergirl from their respective films, the Golden Age Flash, Jay Garrick, and my personal favorite, Nick Cage as the Tim Burton version of Superman fighting a giant spider. John Peters, you got your fucking spider, now sit the fuck down. I personally really enjoyed the cameos, even though the CGI for the cameos was also very bad. Yes, even George Clooney I enjoyed, who makes an appearance at the end. There is an after-credits stinger, but I advise skipping it. It just wasn't worth the wait. It's more or less just a goofy joke at the end. Don't bother sitting through the credits for that. All in all, the performances from Ezra, Sasha, Affleck, and Keaton were great. The writing, for the most part, was well done, but the CGI was incredibly horrid at times, and the villains were not memorable in the slightest. I'm middle of the road here. Overall, I'm scoring The Flash 3 out of 5 stars, and I'm cautiously optimistic about DC's future. What I want to know now is, did you see The Flash? If you did, what did you think? Are you confident in the future of DC films under James Gunn's leadership? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. While you're at it, subscribe to my channel where I talk all about video games and movies. Until next time, folks, keep it classy and keep it geeky.